Some of the most confidently stated facts you know are fiction, not urban legend territory, not internet rumor, the kind of thing that gets taught in classrooms, repeated by doctors, printed in textbooks, and passed down through generations like inherited furniture nobody questions. Turns out, a lot of that furniture is fake. Scientists ran the studies. Historians dug through the records. And the results kept coming back the same way. The version most people believe is wrong. The real version is stranger, and the explanation for how the lie spread is usually more interesting than the myth itself. Number 1 on the fabrication list, Napoleon Bonaparte was a tiny man. You've heard this your entire life. Cartoons drew him standing on a stool to reach the map. Historians coined the Napoleon complex. The theory that short men overcompensate by trying to dominate everything within reach. It's one of the most confidently repeated claims in casual history conversation, and it's almost entirely wrong. Napoleon was 5'7". That's average height for a French man in the early 1800s and taller than many of his British contemporaries. He wasn't towering, but he wasn't short by any standard that applied when he was alive. The confusion came from two places, and neither of them had anything to do with Napoleon's actual body. The first was a unit conversion mistake. France measured height in French inches. Britain measured height in British inches. These are not the same inch. French inches were longer. When Napoleon's height got recorded as 5'2" in French units and then copied into British records without conversion, it shrunk him by several inches on paper. One clerical error, never caught and never corrected, turned an average-sized general into a punchline that lasted 2 centuries. The second source was a British cartoonist named James Gillray. Gillray drew savage political caricatures of Napoleon throughout the Napoleonic Wars, and he consistently depicted him as a tiny, furious man in the middle of a tantrum, stomping around in an oversized hat. These cartoons ran in newspapers across Britain and became the defining visual image of Napoleon for much of the English-speaking world. Britain and France were at war. British propaganda needed Napoleon to look ridiculous, and nothing makes a general look ridiculous like drawing him as a small man in a large hat yelling at things. Gillray's version was so effective it outlasted the war by about 200 years. People today repeat it without knowing they're citing wartime propaganda from 1803. There's also the matter of his personal guard. Napoleon's Imperial Guard had a strict height requirement. His elite soldiers had to be at least 5'8" to serve in the unit. They were physically imposing by design, meant to intimidate on the battlefield. Napoleon stood next to them constantly. The optics of an average height man permanently flanked by taller soldiers made him look shorter than he was. Every portrait, every sketch, every official ceremony reinforced the same visual. It's the same reason every president looks slightly smaller standing next to the Secret Service. The contrast was real. The measurement behind the contrast was not. The Napoleon complex, by the way, is also contested. The psychological research on whether short men actually overcompensate more than tall men is mixed and inconsistent. Some studies dispute the effect entirely. The phrase stuck because it made a good story. The story made a good insult. The insult outlasted the evidence. That's exactly how most of these myths operate. They don't survive because they're true. They survive because they're useful. Number 2, Einstein failed math as a child. You've probably heard this one used as encouragement. Even Einstein struggled in school. Teachers repeat it, motivational posters print it next to stock photos of galaxies, and well-meaning adults cite it whenever a kid fails a test. The idea is genuinely comforting. If the greatest scientific mind of the 20th century couldn't handle long division, maybe there's hope for everyone else. The problem is that Einstein did not fail math. He was exceptional at it from an early age, and he knew it. By the time Einstein was 12, he had taught himself algebra and Euclidean geometry over a single summer. He didn't have a tutor. He worked through an entire geometry textbook before school started. At 15, he had mastered calculus. His mathematics teacher in Zurich later noted that Einstein was so far ahead of the class that conventional teaching had become pointless. Not because he was failing, but because he had already moved past the entire curriculum. That's not a description of a student who struggles with numbers. That's a description of someone who outgrew the room. The myth spread because it answered a real question people had. If Einstein was so brilliant, why did he clash with teachers? Why did he get described as difficult and insubordinate? The answer everyone wanted was that school just wasn't built for minds like his. That's a comforting idea. It tells every struggling student that failure might secretly be genius in disguise. It tells parents that grades don't measure what actually matters. It tells educators that the problem is the system, not the child. These aren't bad ideas. They're just not what Einstein's actual school record shows. The myth has a specific and traceable origin. In Switzerland, where Einstein attended school as a teenager, the grading scale ran from 1 to 6. 6 was the highest possible score. 1 was the lowest. Einstein consistently scored 5s and 6s in mathematics and physics. When someone later examined his Swiss report card and applied the German grading scale, where 1 is the top mark and 6 is the bottom, the scores inverted completely. His excellent grades became apparent failures overnight. One grading system transposed onto another, without anyone noticing the scales ran in opposite directions, turned a prodigy into a cautionary tale. The error compounded because it was useful. Schools needed a story about a brilliant person who struggled early. The motivational poster industry needed proof that failure and genius could coexist in the same biography. Einstein failing math served both needs perfectly, and nobody had a strong incentive to find the original report card and verify the claim. The myth moved faster than any correction. By the time historians started checking the Swiss records, the story had already been printed in 1,000 places and told by 1,000,000 teachers. What Einstein actually struggled with had nothing to do with mathematics. That explanation is considerably more interesting than a grading error, and it comes up next. What Einstein actually struggled with was language, specifically French. The Swiss secondary school he attended required demonstrated proficiency in French, and Einstein found it genuinely difficult. His French scores were mediocre by any grading system in any country. His physics and mathematics scores in the same reports were exceptional. The boy who could not reliably conjugate French verbs was simultaneously teaching himself calculus for entertainment. That's not a learning disability spread across subjects. That's a very specific skill gap in one foreign language. Surrounded by demonstrated mastery in every subject that would eventually define his career. The myth required him to be globally bad at school. The record showed he was bad at one language. Everything else got compressed into whatever version fit best on a motivational poster. Number 3, you can see the Great Wall of China from space. This claim has been repeated so confidently for so long that it appeared in published textbooks, got cited by teachers as a verified fun fact, and was included in promotional travel material for the wall itself. The wall is massive, genuinely impressive, and worth visiting on its own terms. It is not visible from space, not from low Earth orbit, not from the moon, not from any altitude that counts as space by any reasonable definition. Astronauts have confirmed this personally and on the record. The Great Wall is long. Roughly 13,000 miles of it survive in various states of preservation across northern China. But it is not wide. The average wall width runs between 15 and 30 feet. From orbit, 15 feet of gray stone against gray-brown terrain is functionally invisible to the naked human eye. Trying to spot it from space is like trying to see a single strand of thread stretched across a parking lot while standing on the roof of a 10-story building. The length is extraordinary. The width does not meet the minimum threshold the human eye can resolve at orbital distance. Length alone doesn't compensate for that. NASA confirmed this after Yang Liwei became China's first astronaut in 2003 and reported that he had specifically looked for the wall from orbit and could not find it. He was disappointed. The Chinese government was diplomatically uncomfortable with the announcement. Several Chinese textbooks had printed visible from space as an established fact, and correcting it meant publicly acknowledging the claim had always been wrong. The wall is one of the most impressive construction projects in human history. It did not need a space endorsement. Someone invented one anyway, and it ran unchallenged for decades. The origin traces to 1932. A Ripley's Believe It or Not entry claimed the Great Wall was the mightiest work of man and the only human construction visible from the moon. The moon sits roughly 239,000 miles from Earth. At that distance, the entire wall would be a fraction of a single pixel. The claim required no expertise in optics to invent, and no skepticism to repeat. It sounded like the kind of fact that should be true. A structure that old, that long, that famous. Surely space exploration would confirm it eventually. The physics declined to cooperate. If the wall were genuinely wide enough to resolve from orbit with the naked eye, it would need to be roughly a mile across its entire length. A mile-wide wall running 13,000 miles would represent a construction project so vast it would have required every person alive in medieval China working daily for several overlapping generations. The wall historians actually know about took centuries to build and strained multiple dynasties, nearly to collapse under the labor demand. Nobody ran the geometry before printing the claim in a textbook. The number sounded impressive. That was enough. Number 4. The tongue has dedicated regions for specific tastes: sweet at the tip, bitter at the back, salty and sour along the sides. You've probably seen the diagram. It appeared in biology textbooks and health class curricula for decades, repeated confidently by teachers who had learned it from teachers who had learned it before them. It is a precise and detailed diagram of something that does not exist. Your entire tongue detects all basic tastes across its whole surface. The taste buds near the tip respond to bitter as readily as the taste buds at the back respond to sweet. There is no zone, there is no map. Scientists confirm this by isolating sections of tongue tissue, applying individual taste compounds directly, and measuring the resulting neural responses. The responses showed up everywhere across the surface. The map was wrong at every boundary it claimed to draw, and every boundary it drew was invented. The source is a paper published in 1901 by a German scientist named D. P. Hanig. Hanig was attempting to measure subtle regional differences in taste sensitivity. What he actually found were minor variations, slight differences in the concentration of a compound needed to first register in a given region. Not exclusive zones, not separate taste departments, small gradations at the edges of sensitivity thresholds. His paper included a diagram meant to illustrate these gradations. That diagram was misread, then flattened into hard borders, then reproduced in American textbooks by the 1940s as if it showed distinct regions with exclusive functions. A nuance became a boundary line. A marginal variation became a color-coded map hung on classroom walls for 50 years. Virginia Collings, a researcher at the University of Pittsburgh, formally dismantled the tongue map in 1974. She replicated Hanig's original experiments, applied the same compounds to the same regions, and found no meaningful variation across the tongue surface. Her findings were published. The tongue map remained in textbooks for another 3 decades anyway. Knowing something is wrong and removing it from the places where people learn it are 2 entirely different projects. The second one always takes longer than it should. The user prompt is empty, so I cannot provide a summary. Number 5. Your blood is blue inside your body. This one gets repeated with unusual confidence, usually as a way to explain why veins look blue through the skin. The reasoning sounds logical. Blood appears red in medical images, but veins look blue through your arm. Therefore, the blood inside must be blue, and it turns red when it hits oxygen. This is wrong in a way that is almost complete. Your blood has never been blue. Not for a second. Not even in the most oxygen-depleted vein in your body. Blood is red because of hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen through the body. When hemoglobin is fully oxygenated, it's a bright cherry red. When it returns through the veins after delivering its oxygen to tissues, it's a darker maroon. Dark red, not blue. The claim requires blood to change color entirely based on oxygen exposure, like a mood ring built from human biology. The actual oxygen difference between arterial and venous blood produces a shift from bright red to dark red. That's the entire range. There is no blue phase. The reason veins look blue through your skin is a lighting and tissue penetration problem, not a color problem. Skin absorbs and scatters light in wavelength-specific ways. Longer wavelengths, like red, penetrate skin more deeply and get absorbed before they can reflect back. Shorter wavelengths, like blue and green, reflect back closer to the surface. When you look at a vein through the skin, your eyes detect the reflected wavelengths at the surface, which skew blue, rather than the actual color of the blood underneath. The same vein that looks blue through your skin would look dark red the moment you exposed it to air. Nothing about the blood changes. The optics of the observation change. If blood actually turned blue when it lost oxygen, human medicine would have noticed. Blood draws would produce two colors depending on which vessel the needle entered. Surgical teams would manage arterial red and venous blue as separate concerns. Emergency transfusions would require color sorting. None of these complications exist because the complication doesn't exist. Every blood sample drawn from every person at every oxygen level in every vein across recorded medical history has been red. The variation is bright red to dark red. The claim that venous blood crosses into an entirely different color is not a gray area in the research. It simply isn't true. Number 6. Your hair and fingernails keep growing after you die. This one gets passed around as a creepy but legitimate biological fact. The kind of specific disturbing claim that survives precisely because it's specific and disturbing. It circulates through sleepover conversations and true crime content with consistent confidence. It's false. Hair and nails stop growing at death immediately and permanently. Growth requires cellular activity. Cellular activity requires glucose and oxygen delivery. Glucose and oxygen delivery requires a functioning circulatory system. When circulation stops, the entire supply chain collapses. There is no workaround, no residual mechanism, no isolated continuation. The process ends. What actually happens after death involves dehydration. Skin and soft tissue begin drying out and contracting, pulling away from the body's extremities. Fingernails are embedded in the skin at a specific point near the base of the nail bed. As the surrounding skin dehydrates and retracts, the exposed portion of the nail extends beyond where it sat when the person was alive. The nail didn't grow. The skin around it got smaller. The same process happens with facial stubble. Skin pulls back slightly from each follicle, making the hair appear longer. No follicle produced new hair. The tissue containing it just shrank. The if this were true calculation is simple. If hair and nails genuinely continued growing after death, the mechanism doing the growing would need to operate independently of blood circulation, cellular respiration, and metabolic activity. It would need to be a completely separate system running on no known biological fuel source. No such system exists in human anatomy or the anatomy of any other organism. Evolution doesn't engineer backup growth systems that activate only when everything else shuts down permanently. If it did, hospitals would use it for something other than fingernails. The nail that looks longer 3 days after death is a nail that never moved. The skin holding it just retreated. The myth survives because it tells a better story than skin retraction. A version of the body that keeps doing small, ordinary things after death. Still growing, still changing, still technically in motion, carries a meaning that basic dehydration does not. The wrong version implies something unresolved about where the body ends and the person begins. The correct version implies nothing except physics and time. Most of these myths follow the same structure. They survive not because people are credulous, but because the wrong version does more work. It explains something people wanted explained, fits a pattern people already believed, or fills an emotional gap the true version leaves completely empty. Columbus is a good example. Everyone learned that Columbus proved the Earth was round because ignorant Europeans believed it was flat, and it took a brave explorer to change their minds. Educated Europeans in 1492 knew the Earth was round. The ancient Greeks had calculated its circumference with a stick and a shadow in 240 BCE and come impressively close. The flat Earth opposition in the Columbus story was invented by Washington Irving in an 1828 historical novel, then cited as fact by people who didn't check what genre it was. A novelist's invention became a geography lesson. That's roughly where the confident version of things and the actual version of things stop agreeing. The units were misread, the cartoonist was persuasive, the grading scale ran backward, the diagram misrepresented what it found, the space optics were never checked, and the skin was just dehydrating. None of this required advanced expertise to get right. It required someone checking before printing. Subscribe if you want more of this. There's a longer list.